you, Linda, and thank you to Tammy Kincaid, and thank you to the Augusta Coalition for Peace and Justice, which deserves a round of applause as well. I would be honored that this was the first I had heard that I was the director of the Virginia Organizing Project. I would be honored. I think they do a great job. I live over in Charlottesville near the home of radical leftist Thomas Jefferson. So have you guys heard the latest news?
No.
John McCain supports regulating Wall Street. Yep. But, of course, when he was running for president for the second time, local son Woodrow Wilson was a peace candidate. And when George W. Bush was running for president, he was opposed to nation building. Now, he wants to borrow money from China to build a nation in Iraq and to build a nation here, in this country, through Wall Street. Except that virtually nothing has been built in Iraq. On the contrary, it's been almost irrevocably destroyed. And nobody seems terribly confident that bailing out Wall Street is going to work. And when I say work, I mean succeed at doing exactly what the proponents of the bailout do not want, and that is to eliminate the possible need for future bailouts. Even with this one bailout not yet created, Barack Obama is already promising that it will succeed, in the sense that Naomi Klein's notion of the shock doctrine would define success. That is, Obama has already said he will not be able to spend what he'd planned on healthcare, education, infrastructure, and green energy. He has not, however, said that he will so much as hesitate to dramatically enlarge the largest military the planet has ever known. This is how the game is played. Some spending can be questioned, some spending has to be sacrificed, and some spending just goes up, 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 no questions asked. For fiscal year 2009, our government has budgeted $653 billion for the Pentagon and $150 billion for military portions of other departments. But this includes an incredibly low $38 billion for the ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, so they had to do an emergency supplemental bill for another $162 billion. Now, if you add in the costs of veterans' benefits and the portion of the national debt payments that go to past military expenditures, you get about $1.5 trillion a year. This compares with $1.2 trillion for all non-military expenses of our government and debt payments. In other words, more than half of every dollar of your income tax goes to killing rather than living. This does not include Social Security and other trust funds that are not part of the budget, and it does not include the proposed bailout, now known as Paulson's plunder. But let's look at what Obama wants to cut. And remember, this is by his own choice, even if not his own creation. He has voted for hundreds of billions of dollars for Iraq, and he plans to vote for hundreds of billions of dollars for Wall Street. He named education as an area for cuts. The Federal Department of Education has a budget of $60 billion. For the kind of money we are so recklessly tossing around right now in Washington, we're talking about $780 billion to start with, we could create far and away the world's best schools for free, from preschool through graduate school, for everyone. Among other things, this would greatly benefit our economy. Among other things, this would make it much more difficult for politicians to push us around, because if we were so educated, we would know better. So there's good and bad, right? Obama says he will cut infrastructure. Well, the entire Department of Transportation runs on $71 billion, less than a tenth of what we're talking about. Amtrak runs on $800 million. So this bag of goodies for Wall Street bankers that they're busy tying ribbons and bows on could multiply Amtrak's budget 1,000-fold. And yet we are supposed to believe it is the cost of infrastructure that we cannot afford and must be slashed. What about green energy? Well, the EPA spends $622 million on researching green energy every year. That would not cover the sales price of about 10 of the homes of the bankers that we are bailing out in their time of need. $622 million is not only much less than $780 billion, it is much less than $1 billion. This is the kind of money we're talking about. Military kind of money. And the very first place Obama says he wants to cut in his new initiatives is health care. But there is absolutely no need for spending money on health care. We already spend more per capita than any other nation, and we get less for it because so much of it goes to that uniquely American pride and joy, the private insurance company. And here we are bailing out other insurance companies. The real irony is going to come when we are asked to bail out the health insurance companies, which would not exist at all if not for our misguided charity at the expense of the health and the lives of millions of Americans who could be kept alive and healthy with single-payer health coverage. Now, every time there is a new Cheney-Bush scandal, every time we discover that Dick Cheney lied to Dick Armey, or another top Iraqi informed the White House there were no weapons, or another missile kills another large family in Afghanistan, or the wars in Pakistan and Iran get out of control before we knew they'd begun, or we discover that Cheney's lawyer signed the Attorney General's name to an authorization to search Democrats' body cavities, or the North Pole floats past the Republican National Convention. I'm using very minimal poetic license. Every single time this kind of thing happens, there's that moment of thrilling fantasy in which we can imagine the American people or their so-called representatives in Washington will snap out of their hypnosis and ship the whole damn kleptocracy off to The Hague in wooden crates. And the same goes for this time, with this proposal to take $1 trillion from our unborn grandchildren and give it to Wall Street, when I thought the unborn were the only people that this crowd did care about. Well, I love this idea of clinging briefly to the notion that there really is something new here, and that it will wake people up from their slumber. I secretly have to wonder how exactly this is any different from the past 7 years and 8 months. For that length of time, our government has enthusiastically gone out of its way to provide protection for, rather than from, predatory lenders, and to treat foreclosures as no more verifiable than evolution or global warming. In March of this year, Bush and his Treasury Secretary transferred a huge pile of public money to J.P. Morgan Chase via the Federal Reserve to give to Bear Stearns at a price not determined by any free market or bidding. But borrowing money and throwing it at the people who least need it began before Cheney and Bush moved into their new public housing in 2001. Cheney, remember, had already served as the Secretary of so-called Defense and given Halliburton the contract to draw up the plan calling for giving more contracts to companies like Halliburton. Cheney had then revolved out the revolving door to spend 5 years as the chief executive of Halliburton, during which period Halliburton had illegally done major oil and construction business with Iran, Iraq, and Indonesia, and illegally sold nuclear technology to Libya. Cheney had then left his Halliburton job, along with a $33.7 million parting gift, to return to government as the vice president, in which position he directed the Pentagon to give billions of dollars in no-bid contracts to Halliburton. And for at least the first 2 years as vice president, he continued to receive money from Halliburton in deferred compensation, which was, I guess, justifiable in terms of the public good because society might have collapsed had Cheney not piled up more riches. But his riches and Halliburton's riches were a little crumb off the loaf of large-scale looting that has become the primary focus of our government. Joseph Stiglitz and Linda Bilmes called their book about Iraq the $3 trillion war. They were being very, very conservative. If you read their book, you find that incredibly conservative calculations place the amount of money wasted at no less than $5 trillion. And no end in sight. And who gets the money? Well, certainly not the troops so cynically used to motivate the spending. And certainly not the Iraqi people. Nobody's been liberated. Nothing's been reconstructed. Over 1 million men, women, and children lie dead. But killing them did not cost $5 trillion. Most of that money has gone to war profiteering robber barons, the people who handle the financing of the debt, and China. The as yet unsuccessful proposal to give our Social Security savings to Wall Street is part and parcel of this same scheme. The mission of our government simply is to transfer wealth from those who need it to those who do not need it. And the most absurd thing about this is the number of commentators who still refer to George W. Bush as some kind of, quote, failure. He is not. Most of us can just be grateful that we have so little to lose, and thankful to Nancy Pelosi for having taken impeachment off the table, which she did on May 7th, 2006. And I would urge the next Congress to establish a national holiday so that every May 7th, from here on out, we celebrate by getting too drunk to stand up straight and going pheasant hunting with shotguns. There does not, frankly, seem to be any way that we are going to avoid shelling out a major amount of money to save banks from the unregulated greed of the bankers. Dean Baker and Doug Henwood and every person with any economic expertise whom I find credible predict disaster if we don't. As Baker pointed out on Democracy Now! Yesterday morning, the bailout can, however, punish those responsible rather than rewarding them. Now, he suggested capping executive salaries at $2 million. Even John McCain has proposed capping them at the highest public employee salary, which turns out to be the president. So either he wants to limit them to $400,000 or he wants the president to make $2 million. I don't know which. I suggest eliminating their salaries and firing them without pensions.
That would be nice.
Now, this bailout can also be done without creating new dictatorial powers for the executive branch. Secretary Paulson has asked for absolute power to hand out $700 billion as he sees fit. How much of that do you think will make it back into Republican election campaigns? How much of it into advertisements to buy off the corporate media? How long before the next $700 billion is needed, Social Security is sacrificed, and public schools are sold off to the lowest bidder? Now, we can break through this corruption, but it requires forcing our will as the proper sovereigns of this nation on the Congress. If you go to afterdowningstreet.org, you will find where you can email, phone, fax, visit, and go to protest to try to stop this in the coming days. If we reject Paulson's plunder, we can enact a plan with progressive principles, many of which have been well developed by a group called the Backbone Campaign, and you can find the details at afterdowningstreet.org. I don't think I have time to go through them all, but they focus on punishing rather than rewarding those in charge, imposing and reimposing regulations that used to be there, and bailing out Main Street as well as Wall Street, which includes a moratorium on foreclosures, refinancing for homeowners, a recovery package of jobs and decent wages, and taxes on waste by banking executives that can go to fund useful projects like clean energy, like infrastructure, like education and healthcare. Now, refusing all of these things is being called in Washington right now a clean bill. I would call it a dirty bill. They call this a clean bill, to leave the public out and focus only on Wall Street. And they say it has to be done this week or the sky will fall. But people across the political spectrum say that's nonsense. If there is this hurry, then put some good things in the bill, for God's sake, and the president can't veto them for once. If there's not this hurry, then let's stop and think a minute about how you get to a total of $780 billion without telling us the details of what adds up to it. Ann can tell you about the protest that happened 2 days ago at the Treasury Department, and about the action that happened today at the National Archives, where there are veterans for peace occupying the National Archives, demanding that our Constitution be restored and that we have impeachment and prosecution. And remember, prosecution just begins now when they're out of office. One important factor is going to be the question of pardons. we should be demanding right now a major push, no matter when it happens, on the last day or otherwise, to impeach a president who pardons either himself or his subordinates for crimes he authorized. Quote a couple of Virginians. George Mason argued that we needed impeachment in the Constitution because a president might someday try, quote, to stop inquiry and prevent detection of wrongdoing within his administration, or might pardon crimes which were advised by himself. James Madison said that if the president be connected in any suspicious manner with any person, and there be grounds to believe he will shelter him, the House of Representatives can impeach him. They can remove him if found guilty. So these people put the pardon power in the Constitution, clearly intending it not to include preemptive pardons, self-pardons, or pardons of crimes authorized by a president. They thought such abuses merited impeachment. In fact, they thought they justified the creation of the power of impeachment.